Hi everybody, I hope you're doing well. Before I begin this video and you'd like to use OCD Recovery's coaching services, please reach out to phil@ocdrecovery.com and he'll get back to you as soon as he can. So yeah, today guys, I just wanted to go over what I found most difficult with OCD. Obviously in OCD there's so many little things that we can find really tough, but for me there was a couple of things that really stood out, so I just thought I'd share those with you in this video and hopefully it can help you. So the main thing that I found most difficult about OCD, right, was actually accepting that I had OCD. And I just couldn't accept that, right? I know, we can't physically see whether we have OCD. I know we're not going to be able to get like 100% certainty on what it actually is. Obviously, we don't need to because the principles of acceptance apply either way. But, as people who are suffering with OCD, as people who exhibit the symptoms, compulsions, avoidance behaviours, chronic anxiety, chronic fear, like this thing was prevalent and happening in my life for a long period of time, right? And I still couldn't come to terms with that. I couldn't accept it, right? I'd read the books, I carry on with my day as if I wasn't going through chronic anxiety. I'd brush it under the carpet and kid myself into thinking that I was fine and that I wasn't going through something horrible. I talked the talk, but I didn't walk the walk. I'd read the principles in the book at a surface level, maybe sometimes skim over them, skim read books, and I wouldn't really truly absorb what that said, right? I wouldn't really take in that information. I wouldn't apply that information that I just read to my current situation because, I was in denial. I was in denial about my suffering and that I would experience discomfort for a long time to come, I didn't want to accept that. I played it off. I kidded myself. When I, had a release in terms of feeling suffering and feeling discomfort, I think to myself, yeah, you're fine, Elliott, you're done, you're finished, like it's over. But time and time again, when I had that mindset and when I fell into that trap, I would just, it just come back to bite me on the bum again, right? I'd read the books and I'd dispute my beliefs purely from the standpoint of trying to be rid of OCD and anxiety, and thinking that'll work rather than acceptance. And I did that time and time again. I didn't learn my lesson. I'd read the books, dispute my beliefs, like I just said there, just try and be rid of it. But where did that really get me? Nowhere. I just found it so difficult to come to terms with the fact that I was suffering and that I had chronic anxiety and chronic OCD, because when you are suffering, it's very difficult to accept, right? Because you're in pain, the only thing that you're thinking about is when are you going to get better, and like when is this discomfort going to go away, right? And you don't want to resign yourself to that pain because of how it feels. So I'll give you an example. I recently got a shoulder injury in the gym and I was told to rest for about 3 months by the physio, right? But I still couldn't accept that because I like going to the gym. I like staying fit and healthy. I like feeling good. I like building muscle, not from a conditional standpoint, just because I do. So even though my shoulder was injured, I kept working out and, kept doing the things that I shouldn't have done. And, I actually ended up damaging it even more. And now I'm currently resting it for even longer than I would have done if I didn't just listen to the physio in the first place, right? So we often don't want to accept things because they can disrupt our happiness and get in the way of how we think life should be, right? But it doesn't really get us anywhere. We have to try and take things as they come. We have to try and adapt. I didn't want to accept that I had OCD and anxiety because I didn't want to let it win, right? I didn't want to resign myself to future suffering. I didn't want to acknowledge that my life now was going to be shit, essentially. I couldn't come to terms with that. I didn't want to be associated with my fears and be exposed to them and being reminded of them, and the shame and guilt that they brought me. And you carry on. What can happen is you carry on with your life in denial that the anxiety and fears aren't there, in order to try and shield yourself from what's actually going on, right? But like I said before, it just bites back harder, and in the end you realize that this isn't going to work. And there comes a time when you hold your hands up and you say, look, I have this is me for the time being, and I need to acknowledge this. It takes a lot of grace and humility to accept your current OCD predicament and let go of the why me mentality. OCD is unforgiving, it is merciless. We think, how can our body that supposedly has our best interests at heart, how can it do this to us? But we have to suck it up, so to speak, and press on, stand firm, grit our teeth and face recovery head on. The fact is with OCD is that, our life can change drastically in a moment, which is another thing that I found very difficult. When a new thing tries to latch in a matter of days, we can become trapped and consumed in this very new fear cycle, and this very real fear cycle that wasn't there in the previous days, right? And all of a sudden it's just bestowed upon us. And it's like as if life has been snatched away from us in that moment. I couldn't fathom that in my early days of OCD. The fact that, before HOCD set in for me, I was like a happy-go-lucky guy who felt amazing and was really happy about life. And then almost just days later, what it felt like, I was suddenly just consumed with HOCD and just trapped and thinking, what the hell, how have I gone from like 0 to 100 in such a short space of time? And, how does it come to this? And all the things that come with that, the chronic anxiety. I remember I had really bad heart palpitations. I remember I was in hospital. There was a time when every other heartbeat I had was pretty much a palpitation, and it was very frightening. And, all these things, me being sick in the gym, panic attacks, all of those things. And you think, well, how can my life come to this, right? But the reality is that it can. That's what OCD and having a brain can do to you, right? So I had to slowly in time come to terms with OCD and what it was capable of doing, right? So another thing as well that I found difficult was the concept of acceptance and what that actually meant, right? So for a long time I was just accepting things to make them go away. That was the whole standpoint that I was coming from. I was going to accept my anxiety to make it go away. I was going to accept my core fears and my worst case scenarios to make it go away. And this is the thing where I got confused, right? So whilst the end goal is, of course, to end chronic anxiety, chronic suffering, physical symptoms, we don't get there by trying to accept the symptoms to make them go away. We don't get to an absence of chronic anxiety by coming from that angle, which sounds quite surprising. You got to think about it, right? If you ask yourself, is it accepting something to make it go away? Is that really acceptance? Well, of course it isn't. We get there by coming to terms with this so-called fear or worst case scenario, right? By acknowledging it, by coexisting with it, seeing it as part of our life, and something that we have to adapt to, and something that's set in, right? Like if it was a broken leg, diabetes, we have to come to terms with that, whilst also dropping the expectation of it going away. And that, coming from that angle, when you really choose to coexist and not add that extra layer of resistance, that sets the path for acceptance, right? Just imagine this thing stays fixed and we use our mind to come to terms with the fact that it's our reality, right? Because we're fallible, we're neurotic, we have serious brain disorders. You have to sort of smother that with acceptance, right? So I used to get really confused by that, right? And I found it really difficult because I just wanted my symptoms to go away. I wanted to change the symptoms. I wanted to get back to that baseline state and not suffering from anxiety. And I remember I'd be reading the books and writing out my beliefs, saying, well, surely like I am disputing and working on my beliefs to get rid of the discomfort because that's what I want, right? That's what I thought. But, you can't come at it from that angle. The amount of times I tried to do that and it didn't work, you have to make peace with it as best as you can. And, because when you're trying to accept it to make it go away, that's not the level of deep acceptance that's required. So you do need to be really mindful of that, right? And then another thing that I found very difficult with acceptance was the fact that I thought that acceptance meant that accepting my fear will therefore mean it's true, and that if I accept something, it means X, Y, Z about me. It means that I want that. It means that it's me. And initially, I was quite scared and apprehensive and reluctant to dispute beliefs and work on recovery, because I thought, that this means that my fears are going to come true, and this means my worst fear of being gay, which was my main fear in HOCD, that means it's going to happen, and that means that's what I want, and I couldn't bear the thought of disputing, right? So this is where acceptance and agreement is so important, but it took me a while to really grasp that. I couldn't really see how I could ever accept my HOCD fears. I couldn't ever accept causing harm to somebody when I had magic thinking and harm OCD. It wouldn't budge for a while, but over time, it was vital in that regard to practice compassion for myself, bring down the worst case scenario. Applying real world examples of acceptance doesn't mean agreement. For example, I can accept that it's raining outside without necessarily liking that fact. I had to, come at it from various different angles to really understand that acceptance doesn't mean agreement. But yeah, initially embodying that took me a bit of time. So if you're like in the same boat there, have compassion for yourself. This stuff isn't easy. And yeah, it's going to take a bit of time, chip away at it bit by bit by bit. And yeah, you can really get towards that path of acceptance. I'd love to know what challenges and difficulties you're finding most difficult with OCD. Please comment down below, like and subscribe. And yeah, thank you for this video, guys, and I will see you on the next one.